You're listening to the Changing Normal podcast, where we strive to outdo the old normal and reject the new normal. And now your hosts, Owen, Dan, and Ben.
Welcome to episode 11, July 14th of the Changing Normal podcast. This week we're going to talk a little bit about Lightning Network, and we're going to give a bit of an overview on permaculture and permaculture principles. And of course, we're going to talk about stuff in the news and our first listener feedback,
which might be controversial.
Ooh, I like controversy. But first, what's everybody been up? Wow, can't talk today. Okay, I swear this is just only one sip out of this drink. What's everyone been up to this week?
It's that strong, huh?
Oh, it's very strong. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been getting a chance to run a skid steer a little bit, and with all the machinery I've operated over my life, you would have thought I'd hit on all of the common stuff, but actually this was one I had not. So, and when my first breakdown in that machine, had the track start slipping off, so I had to park it right away, and I'm like, oh, what do you do now? It's not like a tire. Like, there's got to be some way to put this thing back on. So it had to sit for a little bit, and then found someone who had more experience with that machine, and he was able to show me how to do it. And it's actually easy when you know how to do it, I would say. So
Okay.
I think a very useful lesson to watch somebody with experience do that.
Yeah, I've drove lots of skid steer, but I've not ever had a track come off. I was always told it's from turning on like pavement or things like that, like turning too tight to cause the
that turn
track to come
force, or just from loosening up, or
right.
in this instance it was a little bit turning, but I wasn't trying to do donuts with a track machine. So it wasn't that, I promise. But it was climbing out of a bit of a dry creek bed, and the bank was kind of steep, so kind of rough terrain, shifting angles and a little bit of turning maybe at precisely the wrong moment, and just had it slip to the inside a little. So but yeah, anyway, new useful skill. I know how you put a belt back on. At least one way to do it. I bet it's a lot different. I'm sure there's more tricks, like as far as maybe you're putting a brand new belt on, or if it had slipped to the outside versus only shifting a little bit to the inside. So lessons learned.
My week was relatively uneventful. Worked a fair bit on the Lightning Network implementation with the value for value side of our podcast, and making sure that the Telegram bot to withdraw said Satoshis that we actually had streamed to us from some people listening to our podcast on Fountain. We actually had someone clip the show as well. So that was really cool to see. Thanks to the folks that did that. And then I had my truck fail the MBI, so I'm trying to debate whether or not I want to figure out how to do a 4-wheel brake change on my on my truck.
That's not too bad. They're all disc brakes all around,
drums in the back.
Oh,
so it's like
failed inspection, huh? I was gonna say, how'd you manage that? You took the inspector the wrong brand of beer?
No, it's the last time I got it inspected, he said it was it'd be good enough to do the 2 years, but it would need it, and I could feel it kind of going, and I'm thinking it's probably not going to pass, but that's all it was. And then I think it was a CV boot as well, which is somewhat critical in your front end. So anyway, yeah, that's what my week has been. Feeling the pocketbook lighten up a little.
If you decide to do that on your own, you want a hand, let me know.
Yeah, we'll do.
I've never done drum brakes before, because all my vehicles are disc brakes all around. But
okay,
Disc brakes are pretty easy, but I can't imagine drum brakes are that complicated.
He said it's just like a plug or something to check and see how the rotor inside it is. And anyway, he was starting. My grandfather's a mechanic. My uncle's a mechanic. The mechanical gene just passed right through my father and myself. So it probably would not hurt in the least to have some form of mechanical handiness in my arsenal if needed. So, yeah.
Well, that's how I learned to do all that stuff, just by tearing stuff apart and figuring out how it goes together. And I do have a buddy that's a mechanic, and he gave me a few tips, and I've watched him do it a few times. So that's helped. But I did the brakes on my truck. I actually had 2 seized calipers on the front. I thought I just needed pads, and I started taking it apart and discovered that both calipers in the front were seized. So I ended up, anyway, I had it all apart, couldn't drive anywhere. So I had to do that right in my yard. So, but
fun stuff.
It's not too bad. Yeah, is that it?
What about yourself?
I haven't done a ton, but I did get, I think it was last show, maybe I mentioned the organizers for, vehicle, I don't know, carrying stuff around in your vehicle, preps for that. That like hangs on the back of your seat or what have you.
Oh, right. The modular.
Yeah, that's right. So I did end up getting those. They're a little bit different than what I thought. They're not all tearaway. They're like a molly, like you'd see on a tactical vest or something. And so the pouches all kind of weave on. But the first aid pouch is tearaway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
interesting.
I got them all on there. I've actually got a second one coming. It hasn't showed up yet. I haven't put anything in them yet. So yeah, now I've started making a list of all the things I need to either get, or we may have some of that stuff here, flares and what have you. I have quite a pile of them, but stuff to put in it. So I haven't actually put it in a vehicle yet, but I've tried a couple times before and not done a good job. I'd like to get better at the medical supply side of prepping, I guess. I have some stuff, but I'm not well versed medically, other than just basic, your basic first aid and what have you.
Right.
So I need to learn more about that and actually get some better supplies here. But anyway, that's pretty much all I did. I'm on vacation now as of 4:00 today, so I'll hopefully be doing a lot more this week. To tell you all about next week.
Right on.
Yeah. So Lightning. We're going to talk about Lightning Network and crypto today. So kind of what Lightning is and what it isn't, and kind of how it works. We'll try not to get too technical, but So what is the Lightning Network?
A scaling solution for Bitcoin. It is the answer.
Is the answer. Oh, wow. It's the truth. Is this absolute truth?
According to the Cleveland Federal Reserve, it is.
Okay, so why do we need Lightning? I mean, I thought Bitcoin was the solution. Thought it was the answer. So what's wrong with Bitcoin? Dan. Is Bitcoin so 2020?
No, we're not moving past Bitcoin, but it does provide the ability to, as Ben said, scale up. And what this means basically is if we want Bitcoin to be the principal digital currency, it needs to handle thousands of transactions a second. not thousands of transactions an hour, a second, thousands, tens of thousands. And so the way the main chain of Bitcoin was structured, you can't fit that much data in a block. And expanding the block size would mean the average person couldn't run a node. So we need a separate solution for scaling up. And Lightning is currently at the forefront of developing scaling solutions. So it helps us do small transactions really fast and really cheap.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, Bitcoin is not ridiculously expensive and it's not ridiculously slow, but the currency needs to work faster than 10 minutes. You can't stand in line for your coffee for 10 minutes while you wait for your Bitcoin transaction to show up, right?
Example.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Well, we're definitely used to different types of transactions. For example, tap credit card is very different from a wire transfer. And so having different levels for different security requirements, different levels of value. I mean, you're going to treat $2 purchase a lot differently than $100,000 transfer from one country to another, or $1 million transfer. So it definitely makes sense that you're not going to make every transaction with the exact same system. You want one that's optimized for the purpose.
But it's still working on the understanding and the basis, the fundamentals of Bitcoin and its natural scarcity and all of that sort of thing. So does anybody want to try to explain, like, you say second layer, but what does that really mean? Like, what does second layer mean? I mean,
my understanding of it is that it's a coding program that was written to integrate into, or not into, on top of the main Bitcoin blockchain, and allow for the utilization of said blockchain in a way that is faster and cheaper, and allows to speed up and aggregate the amount of data in a way that lessens the stress and the load of what those transactions would have been on the main chain.
Right. And we're still moving around Bitcoin.
That's correct. Yeah. Generally, so if you're going to utilize Lightning, just say through Exodus. So Exodus utilizes the wallet of Satoshi, Lightning nodes instead of, or Lightning channels, I guess. There's a lot of different terminology. But generally, if you're saying a Lightning channel or a Lightning node, it's kind of one and the same.
Well, a node
has liquidity that's been.
A node is running the channels, essentially. A node has opened channels and is part of the network.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, basically it's stepping off that first layer of Bitcoin, or the main chain, we may call it. And so you take data of transactions, which are usually small transactions, and basically you have a running account that is not getting pushed out to other nodes on the main chain. Just the computers running that channel will have a copy of these transactions running through that channel. And then as I think the word Ben used was the perfect one, aggregate. Basically, it's shrinking that data, many, many transactions, down to just a few transactions on the main chain. So you gain a huge amount of efficiency. When you send a transaction through the Lightning channel, it's going to be super fast, sub 2 seconds for sure. Usually it's, just bam, snapping finger, and it jumps from one wallet to the next. So you can gain a lot of speed by having a little less of by leaning a little bit less into the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, which often is set to require 6, 8, 12 confirmations from around the Bitcoin network.
Yeah.
So we speed that up by basically going off chain.
Right. And then eventually, I mean, someone at any time can take their Bitcoin and move it back to a regular Bitcoin wallet, and then it then gets kind of reinserted and recorded into the main chain, the main blockchain, that main ledger.
Exactly. So for people asking, well, why would you do this? I mean, think of it. It's kind of like the wallet you would carry around is now going to be your Lightning wallet. And at a certain point, you say, I have too much in that wallet for carrying money, and you put it back on a main chain Bitcoin wallet.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the example I was going to use. It's just the cash you carry in your wallet for everyday use.
Yeah, and one of the main differences, I think, that may be important to differentiate between a Lightning node and a Bitcoin node. A Bitcoin node simply is a record of the blockchain, whereas a Lightning node, you actually have to hold Bitcoin that you own on it in order to have channels and transact through, if you want to be part of the network, to transact through. And so nobody can transact through your node more than what you have in Bitcoin on your node.
The liquidity.
Yeah.
So it creates a liquidity. It almost creates a staking mechanism. It's not a staking mechanism like a proof of stake, like other cryptos where you're, staking and earning rewards. But
in a way, it is proof of stake in the sense that it's collateral, which
that's right,
is the same underlying principle that proof of stake uses. And that's an important point. Since you're going off the main chain, which provides that decentralized network security, what is your security? And it is exactly that, the collateral that whoever opened the channel has to put up, basically, so that collateral will cover any transaction if things go sideways.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it especially with all the advancements like with Taro and Taproot and things like that, allowing for further aggregation of transactions, and things just keep getting faster and more compact for the main chain, the main Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, and I think Lightning solves. I think the exciting thing for me is Lightning solves both in and of itself, but also creates a basis for solving even more of the criticisms that Bitcoin often has.
Right.
So you hear the same old thing. Why would you use Bitcoin? It's so slow. It's so, expensive, blah, blah, blah. It's not private. There's a lot of criticisms of Bitcoin and have been over the years. But I think what we're seeing is a continual development of problem solving of those things. And I think Lightning is a huge part of that, because it takes Bitcoin from digital gold to digital gold and digital currency in a practical way.
Yeah.
And I think it's just exciting to see that actually there are future developments. I mean, Satoshi didn't develop Lightning. Even books I read the book of Satoshi. Well, that was written in 2015 or 16 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no mention of Lightning in that book. It wasn't even thought of, right?
Well, but his vision was a peer-to-peer cash system, correct?
That's right.
Digital
That's
peer-to-peer
right.
cash system, and this is what Lightning does: is it creates that instantaneous peer-to-peer cash system.
Yeah, on a much bigger scale.
Oh yeah, worldwide.
Yeah, well, as Dan mentioned, I mean, you have a limitation on the number of transactions you can make in a minute or what have you, to be truly a global currency or a practical currency, even for a country. It's got to be able to, compare it to Visa.
Mm-hmm.
Visa's making 1 million transactions an hour or whatever it does, or maybe a minute. I don't know. If you really want to challenge for that sort of status, you need to be able to handle that sort of scaling of transaction capacity. And Lightning can do that. whereas the main Bitcoin blockchain can't. It can't do that and still keep its fundamental core, values as a protocol.
Right. Well, and saying that it can't isn't a knock against it either. It's just a recognition of what the main Bitcoin goals and priorities were when Satoshi designed it and coded it all into and set it in stone with that first Genesis block. Like that's that was the main purpose of Bitcoin.
Well, and the compromises that would have to be made in order for Bitcoin to handle that transaction load would undermine the fundamentals of what makes Bitcoin so valuable,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine like scaling up the blocks themselves on the Bitcoin main chain and how that would change the fundamental workings of it. Say we had 1 gigabyte block size on Bitcoin. It's like, how long are you going to be able to run a node, a Bitcoin full node, when it takes another 1 gigabyte of storage space every minute or every 10 minutes? I mean,
that's right.
It's not feasible anymore.
Stop at the tech store every morning on my way to work and pick up a 5 terabyte hard drive just to update my Bitcoin node.
They're going to have to get a lot cheaper.
Well, that's the thing. And then what that ends up happening is it destroys the decentralization of Bitcoin. I mean, the strength of Bitcoin is the decentralized node system that it has, and that anybody can run a node. Well, as soon as you take it into a advanced, extreme technological area of having to have gigantic servers to store it, well, suddenly it's not the common man's. The common man can't verify the transactions anymore, and it becomes highly, highly centralized.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
So is Lightning centralized? Where do we put that on the scale of centralization?
Well, this is that's one of the common knocks against Lightning. Aside from it's not on chain. Why would you use Lightning? It's not on chain. B, isn't Lightning centralized? Like, why? Yeah, exactly. Is Lightning centralized? Not.
I think. Well, I think what you're seeing is probably started out more centralized, and I think the decentralization of it is continuing over time as adoption increases.
Yeah.
So initially, you probably had a small number of nodes that had all the liquidity, right? And everybody kind of had to run through them because there wasn't very many. But I forget what the number is. I read it back, a month or so ago. The number of Lightning nodes there are now.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting pretty large. And didn't you say a few shows ago what the actual sort of dollar value of Bitcoin in Lightning right now was?
Oh, there was a few shows ago. I probably had it in the news stories, but it would have been would have broke through the 4,000 Bitcoin, like the total number of Bitcoin that was housed as liquidity within the Lightning network was
right.
It broke. It was over 4,000,
right?
Which is math. Brain can't do it right now.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, you go first.
I don't see any reason why Lightning channels couldn't be so easy to set up that people could spin up very localized Bitcoin channels and use those within their groups. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, they wouldn't be having to trust a third party.
That's right. I mean, starting a Lightning node is very easy. I mean, I have a Lightning node. It's very easy to set up if you buy, a Start9 Embassy or something like that. It's super easy to set up, and then you just simply route any Lightning transactions through the wallet that's attached to your node. Mm-hmm. So then you're the final point of your node is the last point of connection with your transactions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's when people talk about, why is Bitcoin the best? This is kind of a very roundabout way to talk about the tech that's being developed, but when people are saying like, oh, like with a fork, like, well, no, this is the real Bitcoin. Well, no, the longest transaction, the hardest money is the original, like that is the real Bitcoin. And because the free market gravitates towards the best choice, that's also where the best tech and the best implementation and the best leaps and bounds and steps forward is going to be. And so we have things like, the Cash App and Strike in the United States right now that are allowing you to just deposit dollars onto their platform and send that said dollars amount into a Lightning address, and it gets converted in the background to Bitcoin. Or you can send dollars through the Cash App to someone else, and it ends up being converted into Bitcoin on Lightning and then reconverted into dollars on the other person's end. Like things like that are just, stuff like that's just coming in leaps and bounds. Mm-hmm. And I think there's even, I think one of the big booms in Lightning nodes was due to, well, in part, the Zion social network. So Justin Rizvani, I think, Justin Rizvani and JP Sears actually worked together to bring a uncensorable, non-custodial social media, basically what it is. And it runs on Lightning. And there's a lot of stuff that's very, very technical behind it, like Web 5 and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I'll steal Guy Swan and Jack Spirko's analogy for Lightning nodes in the future. But when you look at the internet and how difficult it was just to host a website when the internet first started, mm-hmm. and how much just the knowledge needed to do it. And when everyone was first starting, they realized that, okay, this is really difficult right now, but obviously the internet is going to become very key and very functional in the future. So we got to make this simple. And mm-hmm. eventually that's likely what it's going to be, is that, like you said, it's already very simple. And like Dan said, make it super easy for someone to just spin up a Lightning node. That's likely the way it's going to be here in the not so distant future. I mean, it's already on the verge of dawning on us already. So
yeah, I think you're going to see more and more that the technical aspect of Bitcoin in general, but especially second layer and third layer applications, that's going to fade into the background, and you'll get more of a interface that you deal with, but all the technical stuff is just going to happen in the background automatically. And you'll mm-hmm. You send an EMT to someone, electronic money transfer to someone right now. You don't see all the stuff that goes on in the background. You just, type in an email and boom, off it goes. And there it is. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in the background we don't see. And I think this is going to become more and more like that for people, especially as adoption increases. People are going to want simple and easy and foolproof. So,
well, the other thing is, like, Bitcoin's going to eat everything eventually. Sure. And the developments and the tech on Bitcoin are going to eat everything. Like mm-hmm. just Lightning in and of itself, the speed, excuse me. Visa is fast, but it takes up to 72 hours to settle that transaction. Finally, Lightning is settled finally, and then double finally when that node is closed and the transaction is implemented into the Bitcoin, the main chain.
Yeah, the channel's closed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in the process of eating everything, like, people are going to be using, like you said, sending an EMT, like an e-transfer. People are going to be sending e-transfers, and they'll be using Lightning in the background and won't even know it.
Right. Exactly.
It's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the future is exciting. And I think it's so cool that these extra layers can be built on top of Bitcoin, but they don't disturb or try to force changes onto the main network in any way. And so
exactly,
that main chain of Bitcoin is maintaining all those fundamental principles that make it so valuable and make it so trustable, basically, so secure.
100%.
That's right. Yeah, it's all being built upon a very solid foundation that can't be changed. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the main topic. So we thought this week we would talk about permaculture. We've mentioned it a few times in recent episodes. And we're not going to get too deep into the nitty gritty this week. We want to talk a little bit about the overview of sort of what permaculture is and some of the principles that drive it. And is it just for gardeners?
Good. I'm going to need you guys to lay it out for me like I'm 5. I was up at 3 loading chickens this morning, so.
So, Dan, what's your background? I don't know if I've ever even asked you this. What's your background in permaculture? Like, what have you studied on it?
I think I was kind of in that space without knowing it or knowing about all the background even. And that was probably mostly through the influence of farmers such as Joel Salatin, who so many people have heard of. He's just so amazingly influential. But then through Jack Spirko is probably the first place I heard the term and started looking into where this came from. There's been different regenerative farmers have had their spin on it. Mark Shepard, for example, has an interesting book. But then I really got into reading things from the founder of the movement, Bill Mollison. And so I've been studying that and learning the principles. And then I did take a permaculture design course as well.
Okay, which course did you take? I didn't realize you'd taken a PTC.
It was one through not sure the name of it. It was related to Mastodon Valley Farms in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just an online.
No, it was
course.
In person actually.
So I didn't realize
kind of a cool experience.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, because the PDC I did was online. It was just like an online, course, which had its limitations, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different formats this information comes in, and then even in an 8-day PDC, you can only get so much. It's still so hard to cover more than some of the fundamental principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not something you can sum up very easily, or it's not something you ever stop learning actually, because it is a systems-based thinking, and it goes back to I think one of the interesting little tidbits was going back to Bill Mollison and how he was frustrated with the world and just going to go off and just be a hermit in the Tasmanian rainforest because he spent a couple of years there, I think, in observing and looking around. He said, what if we imitate nature and how so many systems work together to produce things, the different cycles, water cycles, carbon cycles, so many things mesh together as a whole. He said, what if we actually apply this to the way humans do things?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a really good point, because a way to kind of describe what permaculture tries to do is work with nature, not against nature. And we see so much of, especially, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about the agricultural and natural sciences side of it, because that's where most people apply it. We see that all the time. The farmer is out there tilling his field to get rid of the weeds, or spraying, or adding fertilizer, and doing all these things, which maybe aren't necessarily evil in the details, but there's this constant, that's a weed and it's bad and we must kill it mentality, instead of observing the weed and what is the weed telling us, and why is nature causing that weed to grow there, so that we're going to get a little bit more into that. But yeah, I think looking at nature and saying, how can we work with nature, not against it, that is a pretty key part of what makes permaculture. But first off, we should maybe talk about it, that permaculture is a design science. So it's permaculture isn't just gardening via letting everything grow in your garden. Permaculture is supposed to be a design science. So the kind of the way that it's defined in Bill Mollison's book, It's like permaculture design as a system of assembling conceptual, material, and strategic components in a pattern which functions to benefit life in all its forms. It seeks to provide a sustainable and secure place for living things on this earth. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the design is supposed to be doing. And then if we jump from there to the prime directive, so there's a lot of permaculture principles. I mean, his book, I've got it right here. It's called Permaculture, a Designer's Manual, and people watching the video, you can see it. It's a very thick book. You can buy this on Amazon. It's stupidly expensive.
That's a self-defense weapon right there.
Oh my word! You could bludgeon someone with this book quite easily. It's let me see. It's like 500 pages with almost 600 pages with the index. It is full, like every page, not quite every page, especially in the first part of the book. They have them every page, but of different principles that kind of form what permaculture is. We're going to talk more about books and resources later, but all these principles can be broken down basically into the prime directive and 3 ethics. And then everything else kind of builds out from that, right? So the prime directive, and I think this is probably the most, we maybe focus on this, but this is the most applicable part maybe to our podcast. And it goes, the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and that of our children. Make it now. The make it now part is often left off when people read the prime directive. They read the first sentence and they don't read the make it now. But it's bolded in the permaculture designer manual. So I think it's important, but and then the 3 ethics of permaculture are care of earth, care of people, and this one's a little controversial in how it's worded, but we can explain what the wording actually means. Setting limits to population and consumption.
Ooh.
But I've also heard that explained in a little different way, and people explain it as return of surplus.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple different ways to talk
centers
about
around
it.
planning for the future and
Yes.
using surpluses you have in the present to be prepared for that future.
Yeah, I think it's the idea that, so in the practical sense, I'll give you an example. I mean, the care of earth is pretty straightforward. Care of people, that's pretty straightforward. So everything we do in permaculture needs to take care of the earth and take care of people.
Mm-hmm.
The limits of population and consumption side has to do with, I'm not going to put 100 head of cattle on a property that can't support 100 head of cattle.
Yep.
You know, I'm not going to plant potatoes on a piece of ground every single year and just never do anything to rejuvenate that soil. You know, so I think that's the vein that the limiting population and consumption part sort of applies to. The way I've heard it explained as return of surplus is when you have excess, that then needs to be returned and put back into whatever the technique is you're using, as Dan said, so that the future can be sustainable. You know, and perhaps that may even be, I sell some of this surplus so that I can then purchase the things my land can't produce to be able to make it sustainable. Or perhaps I give away the surplus to help take care of the other 2 ethics, you know, care of the earth and care of people, right? So those 3 ethics guide, and the prime directive guide, every other principle, technique, and everything. So when you think of a technique or think of something you want to do, you can easily, without knowing everything in the designer's manual, you can jump back and say, does this meet the prime directive? And does this meet the 3 ethics of permaculture?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, we could go through a lot of, there's a ton of different principles and stuff. I think we want to do that in another show. Go through. Dan, you had a really good breakdown in a booklet by David Holmgren.
Yep.
That kind of broke down
David
some of the
Holmgren
different principles.
is probably the second most recognized name. He worked with alongside Bill Mollison and wrote books as well. And so I found a really cool free PDF people can check out online. It's a summary of the permaculture principles as written by David Holmgren. So I actually think that would be super fun to do a future main topic on. Just really look at those 12 he chose to highlight. But yeah, looking at the 3 ethics, I think Bill was really pushing people to look at more than just doing things because they seem to work for the short term. He's like applying an ethical framework, or adopting that, really. Individuals adopting this ethical framework and making decisions in consideration of it. So doing things that care for the earth and that care for people. And so I think that's why the planning side of it is so important. Because, I mean, how do you go about caring for Earth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you really have to know what works through observation. And then you have to have your planning. You have to apply it and, leverage the results you get.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot of different types of designing inside of permaculture principles. And in many ways, you use a lot of different types of planning in every design. And a lot of these things people just do naturally and don't even probably realize it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, data analysis and observation and deduction and flow diagrams or whatever. All of those types of design overlap and work into doing a permaculture design that's, maybe specific to a property. But we also do a lot of those types of designs just when thinking about our life and making decisions in our life. And I think what you can find is that so many of the principles found in permaculture are applicable not just to a homestead or a property, but can be applicable to other areas in our life. I mean, certainly the prime directive and the 3 ethics are applicable to everybody's life, or should be. I mean, the concept is saying there is such a thing as ethics, first of all, and we need to be making.
Here we go.
We need to be making ethical decisions. And then the statement: the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's day and age, that's kind of been lost a lot. That people don't take responsibility for their own existence. They very much depend on everything around them to exist. And not only that, they blame everything around them when things don't go well, instead of taking responsibility for the decisions they've made.
Yeah, we definitely see that cultural shift towards wanting solutions to be handed out from the top down. And if we're looking at the design principles, this is the opposite of what we should want, because this system is one that continually badly invests surpluses. It is not designed well. It functions incredibly poorly. And it's really not working towards those ethics. So we really need to set that aside, set that mindset of looking to the top of our structures of government and bureaucracies to bring about solutions. We need people to be inspired to start making a difference in their own lives, on their own little bit of property, if they have one, or in their own social circles, if that's where they can be the most influential.
And that's what this show is all about.
You see, yeah.
Like
And
that's
I
what
was
we
just
want this
thinking
show to
of
be
all
about.
the examples of applying that I've seen, and it's everything from, urban dwellers doing really cool stuff in city areas, everywhere from like people setting up gardens in Detroit or even in New York City, doing what they can with the space they have, to large acre farms like Gabe Brown in North Dakota, shifting to regenerative no-till on all
Mhm.
his fields. Really cool example. It's something that can be applied to any scale.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they start reading about permaculture, and I was guilty of this early on as well, of getting bogged down in the techniques, right? And
Looking
getting
at
bogged
the
down.
specific techniques in the designer's
That's right.
manual. It's like
Yeah,
how he
yeah,
shows the integrated series of fish ponds and how they all function together. And it's like,
yeah. Or
oh, how would I
swales.
do this?
You know,
Yeah.
people, oh, swales are permaculture. Oh, gotta have a swale, right? But no, you don't necessarily. You need to observe and decide, is that technique applicable to your design? And that's what I love about the three ethics and the prime directive and some of the other principles is they're very overarching, that are not technique specific necessarily.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like, you guys both touched on it. Like it sounds like it's extremely applicable, not just in the agriculture or homestead arena, but in the just the general arena of life.
Mm-hmm.
How you make decisions. And to your last point there, Owen, like it getting bogged down in techniques. It's like, to me, what that makes me think is that it takes a mindset shift. Like Dan said, we're so used to this, everything being handed to us from top down. So it definitely would take a mindset shift to start thinking critically of oneself, and the daily decisions being made. And we've talked about it several times before that I can recall on previous episodes. That small circle of influence that you have, starting with yourself, and then making that difference. And that's really what it sounds like. Because honestly, I haven't dug, like I've listened to a few podcasts on permaculture, and that's it. Watched one or two YouTube videos. So when I said break it down for me like I'm 5, I wasn't kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm certainly no expert on it, and I don't know that I've done a great job of incorporating the principles and techniques even on my property. I've tried to some extent, but I don't know that I've done a really great job of it. But the concept of taking responsibility and the concept of the ethics as far as taking care of the earth, taking care of people, returning surplus, those sorts of things are always in my mind whenever I do something,
Right.
On the property. There's some things too, like, I mean, so here's just an example of another principle from the designer manual. Whatever we take, we must return. Nature demands a return for every gift received. So that sounds kind of general with not, like, well, what does that even mean? It sounds very, philosophical or whatever. But if you break it down, if we take nutrients out of the soil, by growing something, we need to put those nutrients back into the soil in some manner, right?
Even if that means someone tapping you in the face with a spade.
And so then if we were just to say, well, we're just going to dump a bunch of chemical fertilizer on it, there, we've satisfied that. Is that taking care of the earth? So like right there, you have to always compare your solution to the three ethics and say, is this the best thing that we can be doing?
Yeah, I think in many ways, if you look at certain aspects of modern agriculture, they're kind of oversimplifying just to give us more control. So if you take, for example, the way we grow, you know, crops of a single, not just a single species, but a single clone.
Yeah.
Every
It's like
plant in that
variety.
field, same clone in certain crops, and we're going to wipe out every other plant that was growing there. We're going to plant this one single plant, and we're going to ensure that everything else cannot flourish. Basically killing life in the soil, life above the soil, just totally destroying all the diversity. And so that is not looking at integrating systems. It's not looking at mimicking the ways nature functions well, how there are so many systems where different organisms are being a benefit to each other. It's simply a destructive beginning and then basically a mining finish where
Yeah.
you're pulling things out of the ground and just focused on that commodity you get and moving on and taking the ability to keep mining for granted.
Yeah, exactly. One of my best favorite examples of the concept of working with nature is no-till, style gardening or cropping. Because if you look at nature, I mean, Ben, you're familiar with the woods. You spend a lot of time in the woods. When do you see bare patches of dirt in the woods?
When the wind blows strongly enough to actually uproot a tree. And that's not very common in this area.
And how quickly does nature then cover that earth back up?
Relatively quick.
Relatively quickly, right? So that right there tells us that nature kind of abhors a vacuum. That's a phrase that everyone knows. You just don't see bare patches of dirt because the sun, kills the life in the soil and all of that sort of thing. So nature immediately, as soon as that bare dirt is exposed, tries to recover it in that way. So much in the same way when we turn a garden or till excessively, we're killing the life in the soil, and we can recreate what nature tries to do by covering that soil with something, an organic material, to create a mulch. And I mean, there's lots of ways we can do that, whether it be an actual carbon-based mulch or plastic or whatever. But yeah, we're working in a natural way that's controllable by us, but works with nature's natural bent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one of my favorite examples of how we can work with nature, what nature's trying to do. There's another saying, I guess, that's pretty famous in the permaculture world. The problem is the solution.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, you probably heard that before, or maybe even from me. But it's the idea that the problem is the solution. And so we look and say, I just can't seem to get rid of these, certain weeds, thistles or dandelions or whatever it is. I just can't seem to come back every year, and I just can't seem to pull them. So the conventional modern wisdom is kill it with pesticide or kill it with some sort of herbicide or, till the ground or, do something like that. The permaculturist says, why does that grow there?
Mm-hmm.
So why is that growing?
Back?
Yeah. Why is that coming? What is creating the conditions for that to grow there?
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem, be it soil compaction. That's why that plant is growing there, because nature has said that soil is compacted and nothing else can grow there. So we need to use these plants with deep tap roots to break up the ground or whatever. So we can use observation, determine that by observing the plant. And then the solution is we need to plant stuff there that wants to break up the ground in place of the thistles and dandelions or whatever. Or maybe we look and say, well, there's a pH imbalance that needs to be fixed. And we also then can look at, well, the only thing that grows here is, I don't know, some type of plant that isn't really beneficial to us directly, but we can then look at it and say, well, that's a problem. But instead of trying to exterminate the plant, let's find other things that like the same thing that plant likes and plant that there instead, so that we're working with nature in the natural, growing conditions. For example, plants are easy with permaculture to use as examples, but using the natural growing environment to grow something that already wants to grow there instead of trying to force that environment to change.
Yeah, that one's a really key tip. It's observe and replace with something that wants to grow in that niche instead of something that is not going to be happy growing there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Makes
and because
sense.
you can still plant something there that you want as well, something that benefits you, be it a crop or, some sort of functionality. Yeah. So anyway, that's just a couple ideas, couple concepts of how permaculture changes the way that most people think. The only other, there's so many different principles. Jump in here, Dan, if you want to cut me off, or if you think there's another direction we should go.
No, I was wondering if we should bring up the concept of guilds, because that's a easily applicable principle, and that's basically a small collection of plants. It's often drawn up or described in books at a backyard level. Maybe you have like an apple tree and you surround it with other species of like understory plants that benefit your fruiting tree and solve problems for you. So you might have one that fills the niche of being a ground cover. You'll pick out, a small plant that fills the role of a nitrogen fixer. You'll find something that is like a pest deterrent. For example, some people have claimed planting daffodils around an apple tree can keep some of the predators away, or pests that might chew on the tree bark. I think we have
I'm holding.
graph here on screen. This is primitive screen sharing technology.
That's right. We're very high tech here. I'm holding a book up to my webcam. Anyway, just get some pictures of
graphic from the designer's manual. And in a way, it's kind of a layers thinking.
I was just going to say that.
With plants, you have your overstory, but the overstory is not naturally a standalone level. There are so many plants that can spread out underneath, and you end up with a system that's more productive overall by filling all the niches, all the layers. I think one of the most fascinating visuals I've ever heard in the permaculture world is somebody took a piece of paper, a piece of letter paper, and held it up and said, well, look at the surface area of this paper. And they took it and they folded a bunch of lines into the paper so that it was up, down, up, down, up, down. And said, if you have that over the same area, how much more surface area do you have versus if it was completely flat? So basically, it's a huge gain of space and taking up every little bit of space, because we don't just have
not just horizontally, area, but vertically.
Not just
right. You start thinking three-dimensionally. Yeah.
Thinking up and down as well as left, right, forward, and back. And so starting to fill space with a three-dimensional mind. Now, in a field where you're annual cropping, you don't really have a lot of opportunity for that. However, if we look in nature at systems we might want to mimic, we see systems like rainforest, highly productive. Every layer is packed. If you look at something like a savanna type system, we have larger trees. We're going to have some shrubs and so on, and we have the grasses, and they all function together. Now, you could go out and you could attempt to mimic it by, say, planting just an orchard of large trees and say, we're just going to have trees. You'll get some production, but it's a system that's not as productive as stacking everything together. Larger trees, small trees, shrubs, smaller herbs and plants underneath. Your grasses that can be grazed by a ruminant that's returning nutrients to the soil in a way that builds soil life. All those things. So thinking about ways to optimize systems working together to optimize space. And just to make, not only does it work better, but it's a more pleasant place to live if you think about it. I mean, where do you want to live? In a strip mine or in in a beautiful savanna? So nature is beautiful, and people recognize that when it's working well, when you have all these systems fitting together and meshing, it's a more pleasant space. And I think what people miss is that it can also be more productive. They don't really view those areas as being productive. It's just, well, we gotta kind of take humans and we'll put them in our small spaces and we'll leave everything else to nature, and that should be untouched. But they miss that humans have the ability to do so much good.
Yeah,
by adding a design element that is even more productive than nature on its own. Planning and design can produce far more than nature alone can do.
Exactly. And because nature by its design tends to be a little less intensive and condensed. Not condensed isn't the word I'm looking for. In
There's
order to
no
be
driving force to make it productive to the benefit of humans or to the benefit of cattle necessarily.
That's right. It's hedging on the side of not over use of the ground, I guess, is kind of how nature works. But kind of playing off what you're saying there and talking about things working together, but also being productive. I think also that ties into that is what is order. We in modern society think of order as a neatly mowed lawn with, a nice flower bed with straight lines and symmetrically arranged plants.
My OCD thinks that's very orderly.
Exactly. You and my wife think very much the same. So one of the things that was very difficult for me to actually get my head around was the idea that order is not what we have been programmed to think order is. So I don't know if this is actually a standalone principle, but I'll just read it and then we'll talk about it. But entropy, chaos, is the result of the framework, not the complexity. So a jumble of diverse elements is disordered. So, but order is found in things working beneficially together. So in permaculture, you can have a lot of different things going on. And as long as the design is working beneficially together, that is order. A mowed lawn is chaos because it is simply grass. There's nothing else going on there necessarily, at least in most modern lawns. And as well as just throwing a bunch of stuff together also is disordered because things are not working beneficially together.
Right.
So in some sense, we have to kind of rearrange what we think of as ordered and disordered to know this garden may look like a mess, but if it is creating a natural ecosystem where things are, working for the benefit of other elements, even though it looks messy, that is order. Mm-hmm. Because order in this case is parallel with nature. Nature is ordered, even though you walk through a forest and it seems very random and maybe chaotic. There's a tree here and a tree there and a mushroom here and bushes and, but that is order because everything that is there is working as best as nature can, unless it's been affected by outside factors in the natural way of things. Mm-hmm. Whether it be, successive trees coming up and dying and then, the natural sort of progression of a forest. But that is all orderly and things there are working generally in nature. Obviously, there's exceptions and times that that's not the case. Though most of the time, I think you'd find that's because that's a human got involved. Things are pretty ordered. So I thought that kind of tied in that we have to kind of rethink a little bit how we think of ordered and order and disorder. Messy is not necessarily disordered if everything's working together.
When you start looking at putting together a system that's that complicated, you're not controlling and ordering every single thing.
That's right.
But you are pushing, you're providing some input, some labor inputs, some placement, planting certain plants here and there that end up working cohesively.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you have millions of organisms and so many processes working together that you never touch. But it's kind of like pushing the first domino in the line. And you don't even have to set all the dominoes up. You just have to set a few of them up to kickstart things.
That's right. And it'll tell you real quick whether you messed up or not. And I think the thing is that at that point, if you're doing permaculture properly, you're then looking at it and saying, okay, this died for a reason, or, you know, and you need to observe and find it, and then adapt your design, not just cheap trying to hammer a square peg in a round hole, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. For example, out of the different things I've tried planting, there's two that kind of stand out at opposite ends of the spectrum. I've got my hazelnut bushes, which have been thriving, doing really well for the most part. And then there are the chestnuts. I planted about the same amount of each, I think, 50 plus. And I'm down to about 3 struggling chestnuts. So
wow.
Nature provided a lesson there.
Yeah.
they didn't like the conditions I gave them at the very least. So something needs to drastically shift. And I could simply try again with those, right. Or I could say maybe the hazelnuts really like this area. That might be easier.
Yeah. So I mean, we could break into all the different types of design, but I think maybe we'll save that for another show.
Sounds like there's several more episodes along the permaculture line.
Yeah, for sure. I think observation, though, if you had to pick one thing, is observe. And that's probably the biggest thing that permaculture calls people to do, is observe the world around them, observe the setting in which they're trying to do something, and then based on that observation and other things, proceed accordingly. So, right. But so hopefully that was beneficial. Let's just really quick talk about the resources. So there's an Essence of Permaculture booklet by David Holmgren. And then we'll put the link to that PDF in the show notes, or do we want to maybe do that next PDF. Week? Yeah.
Let's throw it out there now for people who want to read that. Okay. It's a fairly short booklet, good summary.
Yeah.
I think people should look into that.
And then I'm going to put the links, the Amazon links to Permaculture Designer's Manual, and as well as an introduction to permaculture, which is like a condensed version of the permaculture. It's all the best parts of the Permaculture Design Manual in a small booklet that's actually readable for the casual read. I didn't have my copy here. I've loaned it out to someone, but I'll put those links in the show notes so that people can see that and decide if it's something they want to get or explore or read. And love to take people's questions on this as well, of course. All right. So now let's move on to the news. So Ben, you put these news stories in here. So why don't you run us through what some of these things are?
So first up, we got the farmers' protest in the Netherlands. So basically what it was, the Netherlands, the parliament there proposed an emissions bill that would cut ammonia and nitrous oxide, I think is what it was, by like 30 to 50%. Effectively, that would scuttle about 30% of the farms, at least within the Netherlands. The Netherlands are essentially a agriculture superpower. They exported almost $100 billion worth of produce and everything from dairy to corn and agricultural crops, etc. So the farmers, similar to the trucker protest here in Canada, the farmers have been lining the streets in the Netherlands. They've been rolling their tractors slowly up and down the roads. Different people, some of the fishermen in the ports have been standing and protesting in solidarity with them. But unfortunately, there were some officers in the police force that felt it necessary to fire a few shots. The report that I read said that there were some warning shots fired and some targeted shots fired. And the targeted shots struck a tractor. No one was injured, but I think 3 people were arrested. Some of the powers that be were saying, well, you can protest, but you can't, you can't be outside my house, intimidating people. And one of those methods of intimidation was actually spreading manure on the streets in front of their houses, which was, I had a really big chuckle about that one. Another kind of negative thing, that a news article I stumbled across was the Japanese Prime Minister, or ex-Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. I'm probably absolutely butchering his name there, but he was giving a speech, and he was approached by someone with a homemade firearm, and he was effectively assassinated. He didn't die on scene, but he was rushed to the hospital and passed away there. So that was somewhat unfortunate.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But more so. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say he was apparently a fairly popular prime minister. Obviously, I'm not very knowledgeable about the politics in Japan, but it seemed like he'll potentially be missed.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed
definitely unfortunate.
Yeah. It seemed like from the general reception, yeah, like you said, he was very well liked. From what I could see online, he was very favorably viewed. But Japan also has very strict firearms regulations. So I'm not 100% sure.
That's an understatement.
Well, I was going for subtlety there.
Yeah, there's basically no firearms ownership in Japan.
Yeah. Well, so basically, I got a frog in my throat. It makes me wonder, like, where the implications of this will be, because it was a homemade firearm. Like, how is that going to impact? It just got me thinking, like, how is that going to impact any other policies within other countries when people who make said decisions in regards to the firearms realize that, so this just happened and it was with a handmade firearm, because it looked relatively primitive from the photo I could find of it, regardless of whether or not that was the actual weapon.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's hard to say, because I think if anything, this is a anti firearm story, because it goes to show that in a country where firearm ownership is essentially non-existent, someone was able to manufacture a functional firearm. Banning firearms does not mean people will not have firearms. It means only people with nefarious goals will own firearms.
Yeah, exactly. There were rumors kind of fluttering about. I found a story on Reuters.com that Elon Musk and Twitter were kind of at a stalemate. Musk was kind of trying to bring the price down because apparently there's a lot of bots on Twitter and
surprise
non-human profiles. So at 44 billion, yeah, he'd probably want to bring the price down a little bit.
Yeah, kind of from what I heard, that's it's essentially dead at this point, and Twitter is now suing Musk, saying, "Well, now you have to buy it." It's so hilarious to me.
Oh my goodness!
He attempts to take over, and Twitter says, "No, we don't want you to buy us." And then he says, "Well, I'm going to anyway. We don't want you to buy us. Okay, maybe I won't buy you. We're going to sue you because you won't buy us."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
I think a couple things have become obvious. One, that Twitter is absurdly overvalued. Their profit models are pretty thin, unless they've been making a ton of money on the side. That's not being reported. I don't know what that would be. Selling users data? Maybe? No.
No, I heard the numbers on that.
not.
I actually was listening to a podcast and I heard the numbers on that like yesterday or today, and now I can't remember what it was. But yeah, they are worth, like, stock market wise, an insane amount more than their
15x what a reasonable ratio of revenue to value is.
Yeah.
From some of the reporting I saw. So that much is obvious, that Twitter seems to be a bit of an overvalued dumpster fire. Maybe it can reclaim some of its former glory, but
we're on Twitter.
At this point,
actually,
everybody knows it's just a place where people who want to argue politics go, where they can hurl, insults that any teenager could come up with at each other. Sorry, I mean, Twitter is where people go to debate policy.
Because really, if you can't say it in 148 characters or less, then what is it really?
Saying.
Is it really worth saying?
Yeah. So the second thing is, we really need to get a movie at some point down the road. This is 10 years down the road. I want to see the full dramatization, the back and forth.
Oh my goodness. We're on Twitter actually at changing_normal, so you can join the cesspool and hit us up there. So I don't know if you guys listen to latest episodes of the Survival Podcast by Jack Spirko, or at least the Bitcoin breakout that he started doing. But he has really started pushing the Fountain app, which I thought was really, really cool. All of the value for value stuff and the lightning tipping and streaming sats and things like that. He's really been jumping on the bandwagon and creating a ton of clips and boosting content and sending sats back and forth. It's really, really cool.
I'm watching a mosquito fly around and it's annoying me, trying to fill it here. Okay.
And I kind of mentioned this a little bit when we were in our crypto corner talking about lightning, but the Federal Reserve in Cleveland put out a...
Wait, what? The Federal Reserve in Cleveland? Cleveland's a city in the United States.
ClevelandFed.org. They wrote a technical paper on recognizing how the Lightning Network turns Bitcoin into money.
Huh.
It was kind of funny. reading through it, they were talking about how, well, we can't actually figure out what these Bitcoin transactions were used to purchase with. So we can't actually figure out, if they're valid transactions or not. But there were transactions made. And then they kind of go on and talk about how Lightning allows for speed and transaction size that things up to this point have not been able to achieve with Bitcoin. So they talk about SegWit a little bit, or they mention SegWit. But we really ran over Lightning a whole lot in our crypto corner. So I thought I would throw that in there. That was pretty cool.
Interesting.
It's definitely interesting.
So there's definitely an interest from the government departments to have, I guess, official lines of thought and papers and reports drawn up. And I guess the good news for me thinking this over is that it's going to take them a long time to figure this out.
From a technical analysis, oh yeah. Yeah, so that's
cool.
That's what I got for you this week.
All right. So let's jump straight into our listener feedback. And this is from Max. Basically in reference to episode 5. So going back a few episodes. And Max says, America eats about as many cows a year as the wild bison population was at its peak, 60 million, when Europeans arrived. There are only 30 million wild deer in America today, and they're smaller than bison. If everyone starts hunting, we'd wipe out the deer within a year. Hopefully farmers will simply ramp up their livestock breeding during a disaster, so we'll have enough cows and pigs. But we all know farmers were throwing out potatoes and milk because of coronavirus. That's a pretty good point, kind of,
Good comment.
Yeah, because we were talking about in episode 5, talking about hunting and trapping as a survival technique in emergencies. And
yep. So comparing cattle to deer, yeah, it is worthwhile to note that there's not enough deer in the wild to feed the population we have in North America. But deer wasn't the biggest keystone ruminant species, not the biggest grazing species. It was the bison in times gone past. We don't have that now. So the cattle are the thing you need to look at. So I think it's interesting that he's commenting on this. If there's, I don't know, if things get really tough, can farmers maintain the food supply?
Yeah, I mean, when the first thing I thought of when I read this was, I don't think it's a food production issue. I think it's a supply issue of getting that food to the people that need it. Potatoes and milk weren't getting thrown out because nobody wanted it. Potatoes and milk were getting thrown out because they couldn't get it to where it needed to go. Right? Because of the disruption of the lockdowns and all that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, farmers may have to ramp up some production, but I think that the disaster is not going to be, there's not enough food. The disaster is going to be, can't get the food to the people. Because the supply chain with our current trucking, everything moving but via transport truck, is a very delicate system.
Yeah, and we've talked about that too.
That's right. It's great for getting things, there on time, as long as there's no interruptions. But all it takes is fuel shortages or a natural disaster or, name a disaster. The farmers can be sitting on billions of cows, but if there's no way to get it to the population that needs it in a big city,
Yeah.
That's to me, that's the big problem with the food production system on that, which is why a decentralized system is better. It may not be more efficient, but it is better because it gives the resiliency.
There are different types of efficiencies. I mean, we do have the efficiencies of scale of doing a particular thing with our food processing industries, but then you get to the point where you have a disruption and there's no flexibility. There's no ability to pivot to something else. Whereas a smaller operation, they're going to find something that will work. For example, farmers that were doing microgreens, selling those to restaurants, they shifted and founded direct retail models that they could use. Direct to consumer. Several different things were applied. But we saw that happening because when you're a business owner, you're going to do whatever it takes. If there's a possibility, you're probably going to find it. With a huge factory type system, they don't have any ability to pivot. And their lawyers probably wouldn't let them if one person in the factory did come up with an idea. So it becomes just a top-heavy system. It can do one thing really well, maybe, and maybe that thing isn't overall beneficial, doesn't fit into a system. I mean, we could debate the benefit of factory processed food-like items, but
yeah. Well, that's I guess what I'm trying to say is that having massive centralized food production, facilities or farmers, it is efficient because you have one guy, all he does is cows. He knows cows. He can do it on scale. You have another person doing pigs on scale, and that's efficient. The food all comes to one spot. The animals all leave out of one spot, but it's not secure and resilient when, disaster strikes. Whereas a decentralized system of having, which we had years ago, of hundreds of thousands of little farms all over the countryside where little farmers, I say little farmers, they were probably regular sized humans, but where farmers ran small operations, but were diverse. They maybe did a lot of different things on their farm. And if one farmer met with a disaster or one localized area met with some sort of disaster, the rest of the area wasn't affected because there wasn't, one central location where a beef farm gets shut down. So all of a sudden half the country has no beef. So that's an example of a decentralization. And then you also can break that down even further where you had decentralization on a specific farm. So a farmer he didn't just grow cattle. He might have had cattle and pigs and chickens and sheep, and produce and all of that sort of stuff. And so if one thing didn't do well that year, usually something else did. So from the farmer's perspective, they were decentralized in their production. But that's getting a little bit aside, from the point. But I think the point that Max is making, though, is a valid point in that he's saying, listen, I mean, he doesn't quote any stats here. I'm going to take him at his word that America eats as many cows as eats 60 million cows a year. I don't know if that's true stat or not, but that's a lot of cows. And if you want to say, if you're just going to hunt, well, what's the next largest kind of animal population that's out there? That's deer. Yeah. Well, there's only half as many as there were bison. So people are going to starve pretty quick if they're going to rely on hunting. I think that's the point being made.
Yep. If you're not going to take advantage of domestication to increase your production, you need a much lower population density.
Right. That's right. Getting back to permaculture and controlling population.
The answer is not kill everybody off. For all the genocidal socialists out there.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Well, thanks. That's great. That's love to hear feedback, and hopefully we can get some more feedback from people making comments or asking questions or whatever they want to say. Feedback can be sent to changingnormal@protonmail.com or post it on social media somewhere. If you have a question and you don't want to use email because that's, so 2007, go ahead and post it on some of our social media somewhere. We're on all sorts of different places. YouTube, Twitter, Odysee. I don't know where else are we on? You got this post on Gab, but that must be to your own personal
my
page.
personal Gab profile. Yeah. I plastered them all and plastered it everywhere and then seen what got traction. And I actually didn't get a notification from it. I was like, I probably should check on that. Checked it. I was like, a couple episodes ahead, but
yeah, no, that's all right. So, but the email is the best. Or YouTube.
Hit us up on Fountain. Clip it or boost it. Comment on it, and we'll get back to you there.
Yeah, that's right. Fountain. We're really pushing Fountain. If you want to listen to us, you're probably already listening to us. So, but yeah, go check out Fountain. Fountain.fm. It's a pretty cool app. It's pretty easy to use, and you can earn Bitcoin just by listening to us. Believe it or not. If you want to donate, you can tip us on Fountain directly, or you can send donation to Changing Normal at fountain.fm. And that is a Lightning address. You'll have to send that from a Lightning address compatible Lightning wallet, like Wallet of Satoshi, or something like that. And with that, I think that's everything we had to say tonight. And thanks for listening. And remember, create your own normal every day.